USA Warrior Stories is a not-for-profit organization designed to record, archive, and share videos of veterans' stories, to help veterans make a connection with one another and to help us all better understand their sacrifices for our freedoms.
I was born in New York City, kind of always just like a little kid playing Army, you know, and you watch the TV shows and stuff as a kid. But my dad was in the Army, and he was a combat veteran from Korea, and he didn't really talk about it. We actually, ironically, we didn't connect and talk about it until I had my experience, which was great, and I'm glad we had that to share before he passed. I ended up doing ROTC at Fordham University in the Bronx, which I loved, yeah. And then after that, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, went on active duty for a stint, and then came out in the reserves. I ended up becoming a New York State trooper, and then I was in the New York Army National Guard for a period of time. When I came off active duty, I went into the reserves. Stayed there for a bit until I made captain, and then I went to 19th Special Forces Group in Rhode Island. Then 9/11 happened, and I responded to 9/11 as a police officer.
I can hear you! I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
And I remember that day vividly. I was down there by 11 o'clock in the morning at Ground Zero, and that's when it started for me. Like literally 2 hours after those planes went into the building, and I was there. My wife helped me put together like a memorial of 9/11 in my foyer to the house when you first come in, and people ask about it and stuff, and my wife says, because that's when the world got real for us. And then we started getting calls to mobilize, you know, not knowing where we were going yet, but just to, you know, report to active duty. So I went on active duty in 2002. I left Special Forces, and inside the Special Operations community is what I ended up doing, which is civil affairs and psychological operations. So I was on the invasion of Iraq in March of 2003.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
I went into Iraq through Jordan. I didn't come up through Kuwait. I was part of, I was with 5th Special Forces Group, and I went in as part of civil affairs contingent inside of them across from Jordan. So I was assigned to the Jordanian embassy, our embassy in Jordan, in Amman, Jordan, and we did a lot of our training out quietly in the eastern desert of Jordan. So I remember like where I was when the Saddam statue came down and all that. It was very funny. It was kind of funny. So we would go into towns and villages. We would roll in, and of course all the women, children, and elderly men were scared. After a while, through our translators, we would, you know, have an accord and stuff, and it was totally state-controlled media. So they did not believe what was happening on the other side of the country. When the statue came down and those vivid images that we remember about the war, we would have to, like now they'd probably say it was AI, but that didn't exist back then. We would have to get the media and show them, be like, no, this is happening, he's gone. And then there was like a delayed celebration, because they hated him, and Saddam, and they were happy. But it was like 2 weeks after what probably back here people knew, like, okay, mission accomplished. When George Bush said that, these people were like, no, that didn't happen, that couldn't happen. But then, ironically, as the military-age men who ditched their uniforms came home, and they were like, hey, I can't believe I got out alive, I made it, you know, then they realized what had happened. I ended up getting an Army Commendation Medal for Valor a few months before I was wounded for doing something completely reckless. There was a firefight and there was civilians in between us and the enemy, and the crowd ran away and trampled, people. And there was one child who was trampled, legs broken, arms broken, and everything else, and he was literally lying in the street in the crossfire. So I had my guys cover me, and I ran out and got him. Then they just like unloaded on us, on me particularly. So I grabbed him, was able to get behind a car with him, and then my guys came in 2 vehicles and just pounded it and just suppressed it enough so I can get behind the vehicle with him, carrying him. So we had taken over like an old, like abandoned school building that we were able to reinforce around with the perimeter walls and stuff. And I remember his parents would get to the end of our checkpoint because they had to kind of check in at the end of the street, and they would just have food, and they were poor people, but the mother would make, the bread and everything, and she'd have it on there, and of course it had to be searched, because that'd be a great way to sneak in, an IED, but she'd bring it and they would check it, and they were just so grateful. He got better, the boy, but I almost, there were many days that I thought about that, like since Iraq, like where did he end up? Is he dead? Is he a good guy? Did he turn out to be a good guy? Did he turn out to be a bad guy? Is he alive? So I know for a fact, like we made an impact. We did, and a lot of people don't realize it, but the American soldier, really, and sailor, airman, Marine, everybody who was over there, the kindness that I saw our guys do for these kids, whether it was like giving them a piece of candy or kicking a ball with them, that was America. We were bringing America kind of to them. It was a really busy tour, so you can imagine and then getting wounded. So ironically, me being law enforcement back in the civilian world, one of my taskings was to set up in Al-Anbar province in Ramadi, police stations, and we had 41 police stations ultimately. So I was in charge of a lot of the funding and training, and that's pretty much became my sole job to do that. So I'd had to travel quite a bit around the province and whatnot. So I was out on the road like 6 days a week, and my rest day, ironically, that's when I got wounded. So it was just after lunchtime. I remember it was December 11th, 2003, and Saddam had been captured in the hole in Tikrit December 9th. And I was in a Sunni Muslim area, which Saddam was, the Sunnis really appreciated him at that point because he was better to them than anybody else probably. So there were a lot of loyalists in my area, so they were extremely upset. So all the bases were just getting annihilated. I mean, they were driving trucks into them, blowing them up, rockets, everything else, all the major bases. So at that point, I was with the 82nd Airborne Division, and I was at their headquarters in Ramadi, Camp Champion it was called. And it was my rest day, so I had to go consolidate all my notes. So I was walking to an old palace that we had turned into the headquarters, and a truck blast through the gate, and I happened to be near the gate when it happened, and ultimately 13 were wounded. I was one of them because he exploded the truck. He had artillery shells and whatnot and explosives, and killed himself too, and killed one. Fortunately, I wasn't on top of the explosion, but I was, in the perimeter. Obviously, the closer to the vehicle, the more lethal it was and more severe. I was unconscious for a while, broken bones on the left side of my body. I remember waking up, and I remember lying in the hallway, and I had an IV on me, and I actually woke up very suddenly, like I didn't know where I was, just trying to get, because last thing I had remembered was a flash, right? And then I woke up, and I sat up, and I remember next to me in the hallway, because I was right by the front door, I thought it was dirt and whatnot. It was actually blood. So we were dragging guys past me to go on the proper gurneys and whatnot and try to stabilize them. And you can imagine traumatic amputations and whatnot, for a lot of the guys. So I remember seeing that, and it was very surreal, because I'm like, what is that? Like, I didn't want to process that it was blood or anything. And I just remember like my hearing it felt like I was underwater in a sense, like your mind is processing everything, but you're just not reacting, and and your hearing's diminished, and you know, your vision's kind of coming back into focus. And I sat up and I pulled the IVs out of my arm and I tried to stand up. I couldn't find my weapon. That was it. Ultimately, you know, the weapon was found. But I was like panicking, like, where's my stuff? Like, you know, I had all that stuff on me. Where is it now? But I realized, you know, the medics would have taken it off and secured it for me. I tried to stand up. I immediately fell. Somebody eventually came over and was like, no, just sit down. And, you know, I got the IVs back in me and stuff, and they got me out of there eventually, you know, but they had to triage, obviously, the very seriously wounded. At that time, as science was kind of new, or the term was even new, the traumatic brain injury was probably the worst thing that had happened. I struggled with that. I should say I faked it until I made it. You know, to be totally honest, you know, and I would have never said this back then, but I forgot, like, the simplest of things. Like, I had forgot, I knew I was married. Like, it wasn't quite amnesia. Like, I knew I was married. I knew I had kids and stuff. I couldn't remember the details. Like, and it started to come back. It took about 2 years, and my wife is really a saint. And I would bring in photo albums, and she would just talk about what happened, as if I was like, she was telling me what happened, even though I was there. And after a while, that really helped. And what I would do is I had struggled, like, reading and you know, kind of attention span stuff, which I really didn't have that problem before. The VA recommended that I do that, and I go back to school. I would have to read everything 5 times. And I went back to the state police and ironically made sergeant because I read the material 5 times and did very well on the exam, but I was reading it over and over again because I forgot. But eventually it clicked. It was like 2 years. It wasn't as stressful. The anxiety wasn't there, and it really came back. It was bizarre. They were like things I would remember, and I would have to go back to a buddy, or if I did, you know, if I remembered a buddy being there, or my wife, and go, hey, did it happen the way I just remember that? Like, I had a dream last night and stuff like that, and they would fill in those blanks for me too. So it was a very odd, you know, situation for me. Definitely wanted, sounds nuts, but I wanted to go back with my guys, and that's why I ended up going back in 2007. I went back with just a phenomenal team. There was a guy, Dwyane Kelly, Major, who was like my number 2. He was a New Jersey State Trooper. I was New York State Trooper. We just bonded. So Dwyane and I were very close running this unit. You know, we understood, you know, how we wanted to bring the kids home. And this was during what history would call the surge.
So America will change our strategy to help the Iraqis carry out their campaign to put down sectarian violence and bring security to the people of Baghdad. This will require increasing American force levels. So I've committed more than 20,000 additional American troops to Iraq. The vast majority of them, 5 brigades, will be deployed to Baghdad.
So we were sent to Baghdad, and it just was it was a crazy busy time. So we were in Sadr City, Iraq, which is, even today, is a really rough neighborhood. It was just constant rocket attacks, IEDs, everything else. Grace of God, my guys were okay. You know, some were lightly wounded. But the thing that got me was Dwyane. On June 24th, 2008, Dwyane went to the Governance Center in Sadr City. It was like kind of like their version of a city hall in a community, and he was there working with the police chief, actually. So he was there with 9 other, a mix of American State Department people, soldiers, and Iraqi officials that were there to observe this grand opening of this center, because they had the locals had done the work themselves. Sadr City was highly controlled by the Mahdi militia, which is sort of a puppet of Iran inside Iraq, and they built an IED into the wall. The mayor, who we ended up locking up, he left the room to go take a break, and then boom, and 10 people were ultimately killed in that, and Dwyane was one of them. Dwyane absolutely died as the man lived. He hung on for about a half an hour, but not screaming. He said 2 things. He was having trouble breathing because he had a lung was pierced, yeah. And how are the others? He just kept asking about everybody else. So that was tough. And I came home from that tour, you know, like just, it was rough. Going to the VA really helped me out a lot. I didn't want to talk about anything. It took a medical professional to pull it all out of me. I still really don't talk about it. Nobody else needs to know. That's the way I look at it. Like, it's like, okay, you know, but I think it's important to get it out because my kids saw Dad struggling too. You know, I mean, they were little. My daughter was like 6 when I went away, and my son was, my son was like 2, and, you know, like, they didn't know, you know, all that. Like, my wife knew, like, when I would come home and I would have struggles, you know, and they want to play with Dad, and Dad just, he's not ready.
Can't do it.
You know, he can't do it. So they're great. I mean, they totally get it now, and they have a ton of respect, and I'm really grateful for that. Some of the same guys, believe it or not, some of us have been on 4 tours with each other, went with me to Afghanistan in 2011 and 2012. And I was in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, which was, at that point, that's kind of where many, unfortunately, the Medal of Honors had been issued out. I mean, it was a rough spot on the Pakistan border. So we did quite a bit of work over there. You know, didn't lose any soldiers, but again, some were banged up pretty good. Came home from that tour. At that point, I was a lieutenant colonel. When I came back and I did kind of that level work with staff functions, I was a battalion commander, I was, you know, chief of staff, things like that, you know, back at the equivalent of my like division headquarters level for a few years. And then I went to, they sent me to Army War College, which again, because school was one of those things, going back to school helped stimulate my brain, and it grounded me. My last combat tour was to Horn of Africa, and I went to Somalia in 2016, which wasn't as heavy combat as the other 3, certainly, but I was like an operations guy there. I think one of the cooler things, I got to work, like in Africa particularly, I got to work with a lot of foreign militaries, and a lot of them had been in the war on terror too, like our NATO allies and stuff. So really that was great, having the experience of working with other militaries. 12. I did my last parachute jump in 2017 with the French in Africa, which was just cool. Jumping out of a French plane, French parachute, you know, all the commands were in French and stuff, but you kind of still know what you have to do. That was just cool. So my removal date was June 1st, 2024, not that long ago. And I remember it was hard. It was hard because I was happy, because you're like, wow, I reached it. You know, I made it to the end here. But it was really hard to take that uniform off, I'll be honest. I remember the day when I did some out processing, like at Fort Dix, New Jersey, for example. It was like 2 weeks before that June 1st date hit. It was middle of May, right before Memorial Day. And I said, this is the last time I'm going to be wearing this, you know, this uniform, going through the gate and everything. And that was hard. And I drove around. And kind of just looked at the ranges and looked at the gym and looked at the barracks, and just kind of, it was a little better doing that, to be honest, having done that. And then a lot of guilt after I got out, because there are guys who, they died in this uniform, you know, and they don't get to retire, you know. And I think one of the things that helped me a lot, and I think I could speak for a lot of other guys too, is when I've seen guys struggle and you know, not get right, or you know, they become homeless vets, or they're suicidal vets and stuff like that. And I know this from my police experience dealing with them. It was that they had no connection anymore to organizations that supported veterans. It was something like joining the American Legion, and you're still getting that camaraderie, or the Veterans of Foreign Wars, or something like that. Like having some camaraderie to be around other vets, I think helps a lot. What you've experienced, it's not the same as everybody else, right? I mean, of course, but it's hard. And I always think of this too. I was 30 years old when I saw combat. I had a wife and 2 children. I had a job, and I had a family, and I had a structure back home. It's a lot different for the kid who was 20. Who were behind me, they really had a hard time. Like when they try to go into enroll in college and they sat in a college classroom with someone the same age, they had nothing in common with that kid. You know, that kid's worried about something completely different in their life. And my guy was in combat, you know, and their relationship stuff. So I really work a lot with them, with that group, because first of all, I'm very grateful that I got to serve with them and that I had those guys in my life. It's funny because like I'll get the text and stuff. They'll be like, "Hey, boss," you know, da da da, like as if we're just shooting the breeze, you know, like 20 years ago. But I love hearing how they're doing. Those are my guys. You know, they'll never stop being my guys. I've met some of the best people in the world, man. You know, in my life who have helped me. I have my experience. I have my friends, and you know, and my memories. I'm grateful. I really am. I'm grateful. I'm blessed. I look at things like 9/11 and all that experience, you know, I mean, I got to be an officer in the best country in the world, in the best army in the world, you know, so I don't feel sorry for myself at all. I'm honored that I was able to do it, and for as long as I was able to do it.